Hello, and welcome to the Graphic Design Crash Course. I'm Marcus Connor, your Graphic Design Crash Course instructor. I do not have a projector, as you can see, so you will have to learn through my words and my movements. So I'm here because I am a professional web designer and developer, have been for 10 years. I worked freelance for 5 years, strictly, and then got a full-time job and do a little bit of freelance on the side. I did the PorcFest.com website. I did this thing here and back with a little help from Vanessa. She did the step and repeat on here. I'm also an artist. I drew all this. I have a daily webcomic called Brainless Tales. It's updated every day for over 6 years now, so you can check that out. And that's about it as far as who I am and why I'm here. So today I really wanted to talk about design because this is something that can help you with your activism or in your everyday life, at your regular job, or just maybe designing a birthday card for somebody or an invitation for a friend, or getting a job. So the purpose of design is to effectively communicate a message to the observer. Good design places emphasis appropriately while also conveying the proper feeling or mood that you're trying to do. So each element in a well thought out design has an explanation for its placement and size, color, its other characteristics. And design is really about why, where, and how to organize all these items into a project. So it's not just like, oh, I want some clip art here and I like this color. It's a little bit of that, but it's really about how things relate to each other and why. So when you are finished with a design, you should have, as a designer, the explanation for each element there and why it is where it is, how it relates to the other elements. And if you don't have an explanation for it, then maybe you should think about it and make your design better. So design starts in the beginning. Know your goals. Know your audience before you start. Don't just jump in. Think about who you're speaking to and what you're trying to convey. Because you don't know if your design is good until you know how to measure it. Is it being effective towards your goals? So a design's appropriateness, it can be determined when we know those things. But of course, there's always breaking the law. The rules of design can be broken anytime, but it's very helpful if you know what they are first. Being a designer, it's kind of like being a judge. You can break the rules at any time. You just don't have to wear a robe. So, one thing that, when I was getting started in design, one thing that was very difficult for me was critique. When peers or friends would critique my work. When you build something yourself, when you create something, you have this tie to it. It's like, oh, I made this, it's awesome. You feel so good about it. You put all this time and effort into it, and then your friend's like, yeah, that kind of sucks. And that doesn't feel real good, but that's critique. And critique is very important. And if you can learn to love critique, then you can be better at whatever you do in life. Not just design, but anything you create, anything you work on. Critique is really respect. If somebody respects you enough to tell you what's wrong with what you did, that's very important. You should enjoy that and learn to love that. So, if you work with some people and you trust their sensibilities, you should always seek their critique of your work. And if you're giving critique, my best tip for giving critique is not to say this sucks, because that's no good. Give compliment sandwich. If you don't know what that is, start with something complimentary. Hey, this looks great. And then you sneak in maybe you should think about, not putting that big pile of dog poo right there. And then you finish it out with, oh, but I really love the colors. So, compliment,
suggestion, compliment. It works really well, and it keeps your friends. So design begins with hierarchy, or it is hierarchy. Is very important. The hierarchy, it's not anarchy. It's determining where everything goes in relation to everything else. And so before you jump into Photoshop, before you jump into Illustrator, or jump onto the piece of paper with your pen, you want to start with the message. So a lot of times as a designer, you might be given a message by someone else, and then it's your job to, hey, turn this into a wonderful design. So before you start even with the design, you need to decode the message. What is the message? And what you can do is break the message down into usable parts. So typically, if you have a sentence, each sentence might be a part. Figure out what the messages are inside and put them into usable pieces that you can now design with. So when you're working with the message and you're breaking it down, sometimes you have to rewrite it. You can sculpt the message. Just because somebody gives it to you as is, you need to go the extra step and figure out if this makes sense. Sometimes the person who gives you the message isn't a very good writer. They think they have the message, but it needs some sculpting. It needs to be better. So you can do that. And also it's very good to simplify. If you can simplify the message, then it's going to be an easier design, because less is more, definitely, in design. So I sort of have an example. I was going to have some visuals, and I'm not, but I'll try to work with this a little bit, what I mean as far as breaking something down. And maybe you can see this, maybe you can't. I tried to make it nice and big. But this would be like an example. So this week we're at PorcFest, and if I wanted to update the homepage image on the top of the PorcFest website, I thought this might be a message. Could be something like this. PorcFest X, it's underway. Come join us for the excitement. Camping, talks, workshops, friendship, fire, love, and liberty. Going on now until Sunday, June 23rd. So somebody might give this to me. I just wrote it, but maybe Vanessa or Mike would give this to me and say, like, hey, can you make a homepage image? So before I even start, I want to look at this and break it apart. So first, I'm just going to break it into its sentences, because each sentence seems to have its own message. First sentence is PorcFest X, it's underway, right? The next one, come join us for all these activities. And then going on now until Sunday, June 23rd. So I've broken into 3 simple pieces, and as I'm breaking into pieces, I'm also assessing, is the appropriate information here? It's going on now until June 23rd, so I have my dates. Does that make sense? It's telling me, it's giving me a call to action, like come join us, and it's also enticing with a list of things. So I would even break this down a little bit further into some other pieces. I would leave the first sentence there. The second part, I would break into the come join us for the as the first part, and then all the rest of that is really a list. So I'm visually, mentally breaking that out as a list. I might do something fun with a list, however. And then the third part, with the date, we have going on now, and then until is really like a connector. And then Sunday, June 23rd, obviously we want that to be somewhat prominent so that people know that it's, the now is important, but also the date is important. So those are some of the pieces I would break that down into before even starting to design it. If anybody has any questions while I'm going through this that are relevant to what I'm saying, please feel free to ask them at any point, and I can also answer any questions at the end. So my idea was I was going to put together that image and be able to show it to you, but I didn't bother because I knew I wasn't going to have a projector. So once we've broken our message into parts, we need to be able to convey importance. And that's what hierarchy is, right? So certain parts of the message are more important than other parts. If everything was equally important, you would just have this paragraph, and that's not very effective. What you need to do is move the appropriate things into a higher level of importance, and there's different ways you can do that. There's placement, there's size, there's color, style. So placement, I mean, this is an easy one. Typically, the top left of your canvas, that's where your message starts. So whatever's at the top left is the most important. And then as you move down the page or the canvas or whatever it is that you're working on, things become less important the lower they are and the further to the right that they are. Size, right? Size conveys importance. This is why every company that asks you to do some work for them and has their logo on there, they say, make the logo big, because they feel really important. You know, their business feels important to them. They want the logo big, and it doesn't really need to be big usually, but they want it big. So make things big, and if something is less important, you make it small. You know, fine print. Something you don't want people to read, you make it really tiny, right? So, you know, may cause runny nose and loss of consciousness, really tiny at the bottom. Color is also another way to convey importance. So you're going to use the most contrast, the brightest colors, the darkest colors. Those are going to be your most important things. So use of color is very important. As things become less important, you tone down the color, less contrast, more subdued. And then style. Style of the type may also help you. Sometimes you may use a more elaborate typeface for the main focus of your piece. So what's important about these things that I'm talking about here, placement, size, color, style, each of these things should be considered separately and together, and should be assessed and reassessed as you work through a project. When I work with my boss at the office, we talk about putting on a lens. So we have a project and it's complete, or we're assessing if it's complete. And we put on the lens of position, you know, placement. Is everything placed properly in relation to everything else? And you look through it just with that lens of placement. Then you go back for size. Is everything sized appropriately? Are the most important things bigger than the less appropriate things? Are the bad news, is that real tiny? You go back and color. Does your color make sense? And, you know, I like to use a limited color palette because color is very difficult to work with. So I sometimes, like when I worked on this, I worked off of a canvas texture, and I let the canvas determine what the color palette was, because when I created these other colors on top, I used some different techniques in Photoshop using like overlay and burn, and I kind of like let the blacks just turn into what it ended up being, this green, this nice green, and this one ended up being this nice brown. And I just let the canvas kind of determine what the color palette was to keep it simple. A lot of times you're not working on a canvas like that. You have, you know, you're picking the colors, but fewer colors, always easier to work with. So then, as you look at your design with each of these lenses on, you still have to go back and look at the whole thing. Does it all make sense together? Do the colors, the size, the placement, all these things work together to achieve your goal? What is your goal? You need to keep a focus on what is the desired goal. And keeping it simple is always better than keeping it more complicated, because people don't want to read what you put in front of them. So I look at these signs. Shire Society is real big. Peace, love, liberty. You know, I see that in shiresociety.com. The appropriate, you know, emphasis is on Shire and society, and I get that. Freekeen.com, same thing. It's simple. It keeps it focused. So those are some of the most important things when it comes to design. Is remember to look at everything with the proper lens, and there's a lot of lenses, so you have to take a few passes. Also, does your project have the right call to action? Call to action is what you want your user to do. Do you want them to go to a website? Do you want them to click here? Don't use click here, but you want them to click here. Do you want them to call you? Call us now. Here's our phone number. So you need to know that your call to action is there and it's appropriate. That's another lens to look at with. So one of the things that I think makes a design more comfortable is using padding and margin, giving things the proper space. I'm using the words padding and margin because I'm a web designer, and those are terms that are used specifically in web design, but they relate to print as well. Padding is the space inside of a box before you get to the text. So if the text runs right up to the edge of the box, there's no padding in there, and that feels very, very uncomfortable because it's running into that. So you want to give something some padding. So wherever your box is, give it some padding in between the edge of the box and the type. The margin is outside the box. Where the box ends, where do other things intersect with it, and if there's space there, that's your margin. So it's really nice to, if you're creating, say, a button, give it some padding on the top and the bottom, the left and the right, so that it feels comfortable. When that box comes in on those words, it gets very uncomfortable, and it's just more pleasant to give things room to breathe, just like you don't like people coming up on you. The words are the same way. They don't like those lines coming up on them. But, of course, any of these rules can be broken anytime. But padding and margin makes people feel comfortable, makes things look professional. Another one is line it up. Align things. If you can align things in a project, do it. You will look so much more professional. A lot of times if you have a big page that you're working on and there's 3 sections, you might have things aligned in the first section and things aligned in the second section and things aligned in the third section, but none of them line up to each other. Wrong. Just go back, place a rule in Photoshop, Illustrator, or GIMP. Drew wanted me to mention GIMP. I don't use it, but I guess he does. Place a rule there and line them all up, all the way down. Any place where a word starts, make a line down and see what else you can align with it. And you may end up with things looking a lot better if you do this one simple thing, which is just align everything as much as you can. Now, you don't have to, but it'll make it look a lot cleaner and a lot more professional, because design is also about people's eyes and the eye movement. You want to keep people's eyes moving in a very left to right, then moving down, left to right, down, left to right. Just like you would read a book. Everybody reads something, and that is how people are comfortable reading. So don't start with your main message here and then want people to come up to this corner and then over to this corner. Act now, do this, and then that doesn't work. People do it all the time, and I see it all the time. Burst over here, burst over there. I don't like to read that way. My eye has to move too many places, and I'm like, stop shouting at me. So don't do that. As much as you can keep people moving in a pleasant manner, you will be better off. So typography is a big part of design. The typeface that you choose and all the things that go with along with typography. I'm not really going to get too in depth, but I want to cover a few things. So font choice. Font choice is very important. And for those that don't know much about type, one of the easiest things I can point out is to talk about there's different types of type. And the most common that are talked about are serif versus sans serif. So serif type is when a letter has little feet on it like this. So those are serifs. Sans serif just means without serif. So this E actually has no serif on it. So that might be sans serif. Obviously this is all hand drawn. So these are all serif fonts. They've got the little poke out. This is kind of in between. So Yeah. So there's different types of fonts, and it's good to use a limited number of fonts in your project. Sometimes people might want to start, oh, I'll use a different font for this, a different font for that. If you can limit yourself to 2 fonts, you'll be a lot better off. And fonts that are different, not 2 serif fonts, not 2 sans serif fonts. Use a serif font and a sans serif font. They look really nice together if you use appropriately. You know, you try to use 2 very different fonts, or at least somewhat different fonts. If you're using 2 similar fonts, there's no reason. Just use one. Pick one. So limit your number of fonts. Limit your colors, limit your fonts, but 2 is a good number. You can use 3 or 4. So a big hurdle for me when I was getting into design and learning how to lay out text and typography was coming to the realization that I read text. I don't see text. Most people, when they see there's text, they read it. They don't see it. And what I mean by that is we learn to recognize words and just know what those words are. And that's how people read. But words are more than just a conveyance of that word, but it's a piece of art. And I learned to look at words as art. And I learned to look at letters as art. And this is a very important concept for people to understand, because once you've laid out your text and you think everything looks fantastic, you've lined it up. You have the right hierarchy. Things are bold when they need to be, the right colors. Everything looks great. Well, now it's time to put on a different lens. Now we want to look at the words as art and see if they're relating to each other well. And what this means is there's space in between words. If maybe a business you're working on, they don't have a logo, but you just laid out some type for them and they have a 2 or 3 word name, sometimes the space in between the words is very large. And that just feels uncomfortable, because now I'm not looking at it, I'm not reading it, I'm looking at it as art. And I feel like that room is just too much room. I want to bring that in and make it a little more cozy. So word spacing is important, and you should look at word spacing. Once you're getting close to done, look at your word spacing, specifically in the large areas. If you have a bunch of text, you're not going to worry about it too much. But really where it's the bigger things are, the more you need to pay attention to it. So not just word space, but line space, or leading as it's called for print people, line height. Usually you don't want the words sitting right on top of each other, although that could be a nice effect that you might use. But if typically you want to have a nice, maybe 1.2% of normal line height would be nice, so not quite 1.5 lines, but not 1. So line height is important. And then most important really is letter spacing, or kerning as it's called. Kerning is the original term used in print, and letter spacing is what's used for web. This is the spacing between letters, and this is really the most important out of any of these. If you don't get anything else out of what I talk about type, it's kerning and letter spacing. So what happens is you get this type and this font, and you type something out and it looks great, but it's designed to have the letters be a certain distance from each other, but every letter combo does not always work so great. So sometimes you have, especially the letter T, capital T. You have this nice big T, it's really big across the top, and then it's just got this little thing coming down. Then you have some little letters after that, it's capital T, and then lowercase letters. Sometimes the lowercase letters are way over here, because, the font might just think, well, the top of the T ended here, and so we're going to start our lowercase letters here, but there's all this empty space under the top of the T and before the leg. And so what you want to do is you want to move all those letters in so that they can be closer to the T. You want to look at the actual space in between the T and then the A and then whatever other letters. So you want to try and get the spacing between all of your letters to be consistent as possible. And this is not something you do with, you do it by eye is what you have to do. and you just want to get the right feeling. There's actually a really fun game online that helps you do it. It's called the Kerning game or something. And you know, it tests you, and you move the letters to be just the right distance from each other, and then it scores you. And I find that to be a lot of fun. I like to visually try and line things up before measuring anyway, and kerning is really just done by eye. So another big one would be a capital V, and a capital A. If these are right next to each other, sometimes it will create a huge space in between them, so you want to bring that together, because they're both like, they work so well together, you know, with that angle. But chances are, a lot of times the font keeps it very far apart. You want to bring those together, and you look at the space. So learn to look at your words as art, and don't read them the whole time. You need to go back with that lens after you've spell checked and make them look good. If you're working with a large body of text in print, this is very common. Sometimes you have what's called a river, where there's space between words that just like, oh, it looks like this long river through your paragraph. There's some debate whether that's a problem or not, but sometimes people will adjust their words or their kerning just to avoid those rivers. Obviously another offender with kerning is the number 1. I work doing a lot of prices on things, and the letter 1 tends to always have a lot of space around it. And so a lot of times if you write a 10 or 100, the 1 is here and the zeros are way over there. So whenever I see a 1 in print, it usually needs to be brought in closer to those zeros. So look out for the 1. It's an offender. That's about it on typography that I want to talk about. So, overall style of your design, does it speak to the intended audience? This is important. You know, you might like flowers, but maybe your audience that you're building this thing for doesn't like flowers. I don't know. Maybe it's the Anti-Flower Defamation League or something. Or, no, I guess that would be, they would like flowers. Is your design relevant to the surroundings? So, when you design something, think about where it's going to be. Is it a billboard? Is it an ad? Is it just a banner for a website? Is it appropriate to where it's going to live? Because having a design appropriate to its surroundings is very, very important. Sometimes on websites, the advertising campaign will be designed specifically for a website. And that's when you have some of the most effective marketing. Sometimes they'll have banners that work in conjunction with each other. So even though it's a banner up here and a banner down here, they might share something that works and it really catches the user's eye. And that's very relevant to its surroundings, understanding that you have these multiple banners. Just like even all the PorcFest stuff that we worked on, Mike, Vanessa, and I, you know, we wanted to convey the fun of PorcFest as a camping event. This is not a convention, right? This does not convey convention. This is, we're having fun in the woods, and you know, we'll be here for a while. We're flying flags, I guess. You know, does your typeface convey the right mood? You know, I guess I will talk about type a little bit. You know, there's so many typefaces to choose from. Pick something appropriate. And if you pick something really outlandish, don't use it for a lot of it. Just use it sparingly. Use the outlandish things sparingly. The carnival type, just use it a little bit, and then use something very simple for everything else. It'll bring more attention to it. You know, are your colors appropriate? Obviously, here we see a lot of black and gold. You know, people love the black and gold. Personally, I think that there are no colors for liberty, that all colors are for liberty. So I tend to stay away from black and gold, but black and gold is very appropriate here, right? Because people love it. They think that they're anarchists or something. And then is your call to action obvious? What do you want people to do? Why are you designing? What do you want them to do from your design? Sometimes you don't want them to do anything but feel good or maybe feel bad. I didn't spend as much time on this as I would have liked to. I would have liked to have had more time, but there was a lot to do, and I work full time, and I do a daily webcomic. But we wanted this to be fun. We wanted it to be appropriate to the stage. Vanessa made sure that this was the exact same width as the stage, and we just wanted to help people feel like this was an important place to be by creating a nice big backdrop, so it's appropriate, and it's hopefully achieves that goal. So I want to talk specifically about protest signs. You can use all the things I talked about today for making your protest signs. But your protest sign has a job to do. And what is that job? Well, number one, it's got to be readable, okay? If I can't read your protest sign, you're a crazy guy. And that's usually not what your intended goal of holding a protest sign is, not to be the crazy guy. Keep your message short, right? Your audience doesn't have time to read more than a few words. You're outside, there's cars, you know, people. So keep it simple. More words, the crazier you are, okay? The guy with the 30-word protest sign, that dude is totally insane. He will talk to you about chemtrails for the next 30 minutes, and you'll wish you had your time back. Fewer words are better on a protest sign. So plan ahead is the most important thing with a protest sign, okay? Put down your marker, step away from the poster board. You need to plan out your sign first. So an easy way to plan it out is figure out what your message is. Type it out on your computer. Write it down on a piece of paper. And think about how it's going to fit on your board, right? You probably have a poster board. Think about how those words are going to fit there. It doesn't take much time. You can just type it out. I do this all the time with my webcomic. When I have a number of words to write out, I'll type it out first and kind of do a very preliminary layout so that I have, you know, I don't end up with what's called an orphan, where you have a line of text and then it wraps for one word. That one word is not feel very good. It's called an orphan. So try to avoid that, right? We want a better balance. So maybe I'll make a break earlier and have 4 words on top and 3 words on the bottom. So you can do that very quickly. So once you've done that little tiny setup, now you know what words are going to be across your protest sign. Use the idea of the padding and the margin. Don't run your words right up to the edge of your poster, because you're probably going to have your hands on there too, so you need finger room, right? So your fingers aren't over to the top of your words. So leave a little bit of space around and sculpt your message to fit, right? So if your message is too long, shorten it up. Get creative, ask for assistance. Figure out a nice short message, shorter, the less crazy. And then before you begin drawing it, a really good technique, even if you're in a rush, because a lot of times people are in a rush doing these protest signs, use a ruler. Measure how big, how long your usable space is. Don't include your space on the other side. How long? Count the number of letters in your words, and now you can know how big, how wide each letter will be. So this way you don't start off like that guy who he's writing Porcupine Freedom Festival, and he started like a third of the way in, and by the time he gets to the edge, he still has like 5 letters to go, and he's just writing them like going down the side, and it looks terrible. So you can avoid that very easily. Just do some math. Figure out, count your letters, divide the length by the letters. Use a pencil. Just write it very quickly with a pencil. Then you can come back with your marker or your paint. And you want to use bold letters. Protest signs do not work when you use your marker and just write the letter once. It's not. No one's going to read it. I can't read it from far away. No one can. So understand that letters need to be thick. Make them fat. That's why you want to get one of those big fat markers, and don't go once, go twice. Make it really fat. Like look at the nh-liberty.info. Your marker is not going to be that fat, but you want your letter to be that fat. And what you can do is type it out on computer. Look at what a bold letter looks like on your computer and try to copy it. Dark letters on your board. People love to do rainbow. I can't read your yellow letter, so don't use yellow. Everyone likes to use yellow on a whiteboard. I'm outside, the sun is shining. It's hard enough for me to read what you have. Don't put yellow on there. Unless your background is black, then you can paint with yellow. That would be great. That would be very visible. So use a lot of contrast. Very important. So I have a few other small things to talk about. These are more specific technical things I just thought I would throw out. Rounded corners. This is something you would do in Photoshop or in Illustrator or in GIMP. There's a tool used to make a box with rounded corners. I guess it's called rounded corner box, something like that. And you can set the radius of your corner. And it works really well because you set your radius as, say, 5 pixels or whatever it is, and you drag out your box to whatever size you need it. Then and it's got these really nice, very rounded, nice corners. But then what happens is some people will take that box and they're like, oh, I want another box. Instead of drawing a new box, they'll take that box and they'll stretch it because their next box has got to be longer or wider. And when they stretch it, the rounded corner doesn't say so nice. It goes like this, goes, ugh, and it looks really ugly, and I hate it. So don't do that. When you're using the rounded corner box tool, this is a public service announcement, draw a new box each time. Figure out exactly how big you need your box, then draw the box with the rounded corner tool. So you can just use a square box with square corners until you figure out exactly how big it's going to be, then use your rounded corner box. If you're using photos in Photoshop, getting ready to bring them into Illustrator or just straight in Photoshop, if it's a photo somebody took, check the levels on it. This is you can go up to the adjust levels, and levels, or you can even do it as a little layer thing. I won't get technical, but levels, basically, it's kind of like contrast, you know. It makes it less gray, and it makes things look great, especially if you took the photo yourself. Adjust the levels, it'll look wonderful. Make it brighter and darker and all this. Very much like contrast, but it's better, it's easier to control. You can see it gives you a nice little graph. If you're using Photoshop or GIMP, and the best thing you could do is create a new layer for each thing that you're working on and label your layers as you go along. It's very, very important to label your layers because if someone else ever opens up your work, you need them to understand where things are. And use folders. There's folders inside the layers, so you can grab a bunch of layers and then put them all in a folder. Then you label the folder, and then you can collapse the folder so it's out of sight. This is really important, especially if you're using layer effects, you can collapse them. So as you work on a project, especially in Photoshop or Illustrator, if you label your layers and keep them organized, people will really like to work with you because someone else is going to open up that file and they're going to know, oh, everything is organized into a few folders, and inside those folders are some other folders, and all the layers are labeled and I know where everything is, and that's a wonderful thing. The last thing I want to say is don't use bevel and emboss. If you're in Photoshop, people love to use bevel and emboss. It's like the first thing they go to. They're like, wow, it's this effect, and it makes it look 3D and so cool. But it doesn't really. It's overused is the problem, so it just looks like somebody who's new to Photoshop. So leave something flat. Like think of the FedEx logo as a beautiful logo, and it's flat, meaning there's no gradient on it. Just, you know, what makes the FedEx logo beautiful is that it has wonderful typography, has this, you know, hidden negative arrow in it that's created between the E and the X. It's very clever, and it's very nice and sharp. That's good design. So that's about it. The idea of design is conveying a message. That's what your goal is to be effective at communicating a message. So the shorter you can keep it and the more organized you can keep it, the better you will be. If anybody has any questions, I would answer them now. Otherwise, thank you. All right. I guess if anybody has a question, there's a microphone.
I just want to acknowledge what a fantastic job you did without any kind of visuals at all. You really painted a picture in my mind about what was going on. So well
Thank you.
done.
Thank you.